Hey folks, I'm brownbear. Today is the second in a multi-part series discussing what I'm looking for in Age of Empires 4. If you're not familiar with me, I was a top competitive player in both Age of Titans and Age of Empires 3, playing under the handle Parfait. Alrighty, let's get started. Number 1. Team Mechanics. The Age of Empires franchise has long put a strong emphasis on the team game experience, adding explicit support for it in several titles. Civilizations in Age of Empires 2 have unique team bonuses, whereas Age of Empires 3 added team cards that impact the entire team once they're applied. Competitive role-time strategy games usually emphasize the 1 versus 1 experience because it's easier to design and balance. And indeed, over the years of playing Command & Conquer, Dawn of War, Warcraft, StarCraft, etc., almost all of my friends played 1 versus 1 exclusively. It was really only in Age of Empires where other top competitive players spent a large amount of their time playing 3 versus 3 or 4 versus 4. From a design perspective, team games enable players to plumb out more of the depths of the gameplay because races that may not function well in 1 versus 1 might actually be great once they're given time to boom and traverse their tech tree. The huge breadth in units traditionally available in the Age series also really shines in a team experience. It allows teams to mix and match unit compositions that would never show up in a standard 1v1. In many ways, team play highlights all of the strengths of this franchise. Big economies, lots of military units, and battling all over the map. While RTS has always had a social mechanism in the form of the arcade, team games are a nice middle ground. They're closely aligned with the core gameplay, but they're more casual than standard 1 versus 1. When it comes to Age of Empires 4, I'll be looking for explicit support for this feature. Team bonuses and a ranked team ladder are both good ideas, but I'm open to trying out new things. Number 2. Formations. Formations are a pretty unique part of how unit movement works in Age of Empires. There are certain micromanagement mechanics that have just become ingrained in my psyche as a result of playing these games for so many years. I still automatically try to separate faster and slower units by hand to ensure they go at their maximum speed, even in franchises where unit movement doesn't work that way. From a design perspective, formations play an important role in the historical look and feel of these games. But on a moment-to-moment basis, they're also part of what makes an Age game feel like it's part of the franchise. It'd just feel strange to watch units bunch up together in a ball like they do in some other RTS games. It's not to say that one approach is necessarily better designed or features a higher skill ceiling, it's just different, and it's part of what makes this franchise unique. Number 3. Complex economic management. From my perspective, Age of Empires 2 features the best economic management of any of the 4 Age games, and that's a result of its complexity and depth. Let me try to break it down. Food and wood are the most basic resources, but they also feature a bunch of interesting subtleties. Food is not even really a resource beyond the first 10 minutes. Once you start going into farms, you're effectively converting your wood into food. This introduces a layer of decision making as you decide how to allocate workers between wood and farming. You also have to decide when and whether to reseed farms, something you might not want to do when you're saving up for 2 town centers. Gold is an interesting resource because it's both limited in quantity and used to construct most high-tech units. Gold plays really nicely into the overall game structure. At first, gold is extremely important to get out early tech units to defend against things like tower rushes and forward siege. The placement of your initial gold mines, arguably more than any other resource, determine the optimal way of opening and playing your map. In the mid-game, gold helps dictate the flow of map control and raiding. In combination with mechanics like hill control, gold provides an important incentive for players to interact and attack each other. To put this another way, the inability to mine more gold in the mid-game without moving out acts as an anchor around turtley playstyles. This helps keep the game moving and encourages players to fight it out instead of just teching. Finally, in the late game, the lack of gold creates a trash war in the post-Imperial Age, with the exception of team games where you can build trade carts. In this way, you find yourself thinking about gold even when there's none left, because the handful you get from selling resources at the market ends up being really precious. Stone is probably the most brilliant resource and perhaps one deserving of its own video. Players start with 200 stone. If they don't use this in the first 2 ages, they can construct 2 additional town centers in the Castle Age. Placing even a single segment of stone wall before this means that players need to mine stone in order to build a 3rd TC. This means forcing out any amount of stone walls is a pretty big deal. Constructing a tower works similarly. Whether offensively or defensively, it forces you to mine stone to build any additional town centers. This pushes both players into a much more aggressive and less economically focused game. The intersection between these four resources makes economic management in Age of Empires 2 fascinatingly complex and endlessly entertaining. Part of the secret sauce here is a strong element of scarcity. Until the very late game, you just never feel like you have enough to do everything, and every decision ends up feeling like a big commitment. Players are constantly juggling how many villagers to allocate to each resource. They also need to think carefully about how they lay out their base, where they place their town centers, and where their various gather points should go. The skill ceiling on efficient economic management is enormous, and it plays a really important role in separating good from great players. I would love to see Age of Empires 4 adopt this kind of economic approach, which stands in pretty stark contrast with the economies of Age of Mythology and Age of Empires 3. Both games substantially simplified the economic side of the franchise and reduced the overall number of villagers players built in a standard game. Ultimately, this is fine and played into what those games were trying to do. You can watch my retrospectives on those titles to get my full opinion on it, but nevertheless, their economic component always felt like it lacked the sprawl and depth of their predecessor. I'll be hoping for Age of Empires 4 to break from that mold and carry the complexity torch forward. Number 4. Basic competitive features. I mentioned in the last video that I think the developers should strike a good balance between competitive and casual play. I want to add to that by mentioning that I think there are some core features that need to exist for competitive play to thrive. The two most fundamental components are a fair rating system on a ranked ladder and an automated matchmaking system. I'd also mention map vetoes, a season system, and a league mechanic as basic, easy-to-implement features that add a ton of value. The driver for this suggestion was my astonishment in Warcraft 3 Reforged launching without a ranked ladder. But then I remembered the same thing happened when Age of Empires 3 first came out. It's not immediately obvious what these basic features accomplish, and it's easy for the developers to let them go by the wayside because most players don't play competitively. So I thought it was worth highlighting what these features actually add to the game and why they're essential to include from day one. Ratings are important because players want to see how they're doing and compare themselves to the rest of the community. It's not by accident that it's called competitive play. Automatic matchmaking is key to reducing the friction of finding games. Seasons help provide a frame of reference for players and a natural cadence for balance and design updates. In this way, they also act as a mechanism for bringing inactive players back to check out new features. Map vetoes give players a feeling of agency over the map pool, which is particularly important in a game with randomly generated maps. And finally, leagues are not really something that has existed in the franchise before, but I think they do a better job of generally describing how a player is doing compared to looking at a raw ELO score. When it comes to Age 4, again, I'm not looking for the next big esport. I'd just like to see a core set of features that allows the competitive community to thrive. There's tons of additional things that would be great to have, like spectating, civilization drafting or banning, a social system, a good party system, etc., etc. But before all that, I'd like to see them nail the basics. Alrighty, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for watching. I'd love it if you followed me over on Twitter and Facebook, subscribed to me over here on YouTube, and checked out my live streams over on Twitch. All the best, and I'll see you next time.